Welcome to today's deep dive. Whether you're prepping for a high-stakes presentation, or maybe you just have an interest in the sort of cognitive mechanics of the English language, you are in exactly the right place.
You really are. It's a great topic.
Yeah. Today we're analyzing a pretty foundational instructional text. It's an excerpt simply titled Obio, which just translates to text.
Right.
And our mission for you today is to look past the surface of basic grammar. We want to master the underlying architecture of English communication. Specifically, we're looking at the difference between direct speech and reported speech.
And, when we encounter terms like direct or reported speech, it's so tempting to just categorize them as academic hurdles,
Yeah.
like textbook stuff.
Oh, absolutely. The stuff you crammed for in school and forgot.
Exactly. But these aren't just arbitrary rules.
Mm-hmm.
They're essentially the tools we use to negotiate what we call epistemic distance.
Epistemic distance.
Right, which is just the psychological space between the speaker, the information, and the audience. So when you understand how these two forms operate, you're really examining how human beings manipulate perspective, assess truth, and even encode time itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the underlying mechanics here are anything but simple. I mean, think about it. We relay information dozens of times a day. You hear a statement, and you pass it along.
You don't even think about it.
Right. But to execute that seemingly basic function, your brain is actually performing a really complex, real-time translation from one reality into another.
It really is.
So to see how that operates, we have to establish the baseline that our source material provides. And that baseline is direct speech. The text defines this as repeating the exact words of the speaker.
Yeah, it's the linguistic equivalent of an unedited audio recording, taking a specific utterance from the past and just dropping it right into the present moment.
Without altering a single syllable.
Not one. And in written English, we have a very clear visual marker for this, the quotation marks.
Quotation mark.
They signal to the reader that the vocabulary within those bounds belongs entirely to someone else.
So the text gives us a foundational example to anchor this concept. It's simple. Sarah said, quote, "I am learning English."
What's fascinating here is that on the surface, it's just a basic sentence. But underneath, it establishes a very strict boundary. Inside those quotation marks, Sarah's subjective reality is perfectly preserved.
We're basically acting as a transparent medium for her original statement. We're just the messenger.
Exactly. We are just the messenger. But that transparency introduces an interesting limitation. It works perfectly in writing where we have those visual markers.
Sure, you can see the quotes.
But in spoken English, we don't have visual boundaries. We have to rely on vocal inflection or pauses or doing a voice to signal a direct quote.
Right, which takes effort.
It takes a lot of performative effort.
Yeah.
So human communication tends to default to the second concept outlined in our text, which is the art of summarizing, also known as reported speech.
And the text defines reported speech or indirect speech as conveying the meaning of what someone said without quoting them word for word.
We stop being a transparent medium and we become an active synthesizer.
Yeah. So let's look at the source's reported version of that exact same Sarah example. It becomes, Sarah said that she was learning English.
This is where we see the deictic shift in action.
The deictic shift.
Right. Deictos refers to words that need contextual information to mean anything. Words like I or here or now. The text points out a really fundamental observation. Notice how the phrase I am transforms into she was.
Yeah, that's a huge shift.
It happens because the universe of the sentence has been decentered. In the direct quote, Sarah is the center of the universe. I means her. But in reported speech, the center shifts to you, the person relaying the information.
I want you to think about how often you do this naturally in your daily life. It's essentially an exercise in theory of mind.
It really is.
You have to put yourself in the original speaker's mental state, grab the core meaning of their statement, and then immediately rebuild it using your own temporal coordinates.
And think about the cognitive load required to do that seamlessly in a real-time conversation. You are holding the original statement in your working memory while running it through structural recalibrations.
Just to make sure the listener knows who is actually doing what. Which brings us to the core of our deep dive. The text breaks down these structural recalibrations into 4 key differences.
4 pillars of change.
Exactly. And rather than viewing these as a boring checklist, we should look at them as a sequence of linguistic translations. So the first shift happens right at the boundary level. Rule 1, quotation marks.
Direct speech uses them, reported speech drops them entirely.
It's gone.
Gone. Removing those markers fundamentally changes the syntax of the sentence. The statement isn't isolated anymore, it's fully absorbed into your own grammatical structure.
Right, the walls come down.
And once the walls come down, we hit rule 2. The actors involved have to adjust. The source states that pronouns must change to match the speaker's perspective. Like we saw with Sarah, her original I had to become she.
Because if you don't recalibrate the pronouns, the whole narrative just completely collapses.
Full confusion. Think about it. If Sarah tells you, my manager gave me a promotion, and you report that to a friend by saying, Sarah said my manager gave me a promotion.
Oh, you just claim the promotion for yourself.
Exactly. You've inadvertently stolen Sarah's promotion. The pronouns have to adjust to align with your reality.
Okay, so we've dropped the physical boundaries of the text and we've recalibrated the people within the sentence. But the temporal coordinates the time stuff. That presents a much more complex challenge. Here is where it gets really interesting. Rule 3, verb tense. We have to reconcile the timeline.
This is a big one.
The text explains that in reported speech, verb tenses often shift back in time. Present tense shifts to past tense. I am becomes she was.
The linguistic term for this is backshifting. And it's a necessary function because reported speech inherently involves a temporal delay. There is always a gap in time between the original utterance and your report of it.
Even if it's just 5 minutes.
Exactly. Sarah said, I am learning in her present moment, but by the time you relay that information, her present has become your past.
It's a mechanism for chronological honesty. If you report her statement using the present tense like, Sarah said she's learning English, you are asserting that the action is currently ongoing at the exact moment you're speaking.
Which is an assertion you actually cannot make definitively. You only know the truth of her statement at the time it was spoken. So by shifting the verb back to the past tense, you accurately report the reality of that prior moment.
You're protecting the factual integrity of the statement.
Yes, you're downgrading the certainty of the verb.
But that raises a really fascinating question about edge cases. Are there scenarios where chronological honesty demands that we do not backshift? What if the statement is just an objective, universal fact?
That is a crucial nuance.
Yeah.
It elevates this way beyond basic rule following. If someone says, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, and you report that a week later, you do not backshift the verb to boiled.
You wouldn't say, he said the water boiled at 100 degrees.
Right, because that implies it might not boil at 100 degrees anymore. You say, he said that water boils at 100 degrees. The truth value of that statement is permanent.
It outlasts the temporal gap.
Exactly. So backshifting isn't just a blind mechanical trigger. It's you doing a real-time assessment of whether the original statement is still universally true.
That is wild. That continuous assessment of truth and time forces us to look really closely at the specific temporal anchors we use. Which brings us to the fourth and final shift outlined in the text. Rule 4, time expressions.
Time is relative in reported speech.
The source notes that words anchoring the statement in time, words like today or now, shift to terms like that day or then.
Because time expressions are highly perishable. A word like today has a strict expiration date. It only maintains its meaning for 24 hours. If a colleague says, I am finalizing the project today, and you report that conversation to your manager 3 weeks later, the original anchor is entirely obsolete. You can't say, he said he was finalizing the project today.
Because your today and his today do not occupy the same space on the calendar anymore. You have to sever the statement from his fixed timeline and drop it into a relative timeline.
Precisely. You replace the absolute anchor with a relational one. Today becomes that day. Yesterday becomes the day before. Tomorrow translates to the following day.
You're essentially creating a chronological map for the listener.
A map that allows them to understand exactly when the event occurred relative to the original utterance, completely independent of whatever today's date is.
It really highlights how language acts as this built-in coordinate system. We are constantly adjusting these dials of person, place, and time just to share basic information.
It's exhausting when you think about it.
It is. So to see all four of these dials turning simultaneously, let's look at the ultimate test. The final complex example provided in the source text, it tests all these structural shifts at once. Here's the direct speech baseline. John said, "I will call you tomorrow."
Okay, standard declaration of future intent. The exact words are isolated by quotation marks. The pronouns reflect John's immediate perspective. The modal verb will projects certainty, and tomorrow gives us that highly specific, perishable time anchor.
Now, let's process that through the cognitive framework we just established, assuming a delay of maybe a few days. The text provides the reported version. John said that he would call me the next day.
Let's analyze that exact sequence.
Step by step.
The first shift is structural. The orthographic boundaries are dismantled, the quotation marks are gone. John's declaration is no longer an isolated quote, it's synthesized into your syntax.
The epistemic distance has collapsed. Following that, the deictic centers recalibrate. Rule 2. John's original I transforms into he, and the target of the call, you, becomes me.
The perspective compass has successfully realigned to you, the reporter. John is relegated to the third person, and you've correctly identified yourself as the recipient.
Then we hit the verb tense, rule 3, which is super interesting here. John's original quote used the modal verb will, but our reported sentence downgrades that to would.
Right, we aren't just shifting a standard action verb like walk or talk. We are shifting a projection of the future.
And that requires a very specific type of chronological honesty. Will carries this implicit timestamp of future certainty from John's standpoint in the past.
But because that standpoint has already occurred, you have to acknowledge that the future John referenced might have already passed. Or maybe the certainty has degraded over time.
He might not have called.
Exactly. Shifting will backward to its past form, would, acknowledges that a future intention existed in the past without guaranteeing its current status.
It perfectly preserves the intent while managing the reality of the delay. I love that. And finally, rule 4, we address the perishable time anchor. John's original quote ended with tomorrow. Our reported version replaces it with the next day.
Because John's tomorrow expired at midnight on the day he spoke. You use the relative time expression the next day to maintain the chronological relationship between the utterance and the promised action.
Completely untethering it from your current calendar.
Yep.
So what does this all mean for you as a listener? When we look at that John example, we see how reported speech is way more than a grammatical exercise. It is a highly sophisticated framework for translating another person's reality into your own.
It really is the ultimate tool for summarizing.
It takes the raw materials of an isolated statement, runs them through these deictic and temporal recalibrations, and outputs a narrative that preserves the meaning while honoring the passage of time.
And, the source text includes by emphasizing the practical application of this. Mastering both forms allows you to report conversations accurately and write far more naturally.
Absolutely. Direct speech keeps the exact words when precision is paramount, like in legal contexts.
But reported speech is the engine of synthesis. It's how we integrate external information into our own arguments and manage the vast majority of human interaction.
Mastering both gives you complete control over how information flows through you. You choose when to be a transparent medium and when to be an active synthesizer.
I would encourage you to apply this analytical lens to the conversations around you today. Listen to how people utilize these frameworks. Observe the pronoun shifts and the downgrading of verbs. Once you recognize the architecture, you really start to see the strategic choices happening in real time.
It fundamentally changes how you process narrative. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the mechanics of meaning and perspective. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to explore on your own.
Oh, I like these.
It builds directly on those strict temporal recalibrations we discussed today. If reported speech essentially forces us to continually shift verbs backward in time and completely alter time expressions just to convey someone's meaning, are we ever truly able to capture the raw urgency and emotional weight of a person's exact words once they become a synthesized memory?
Wow.
Something to consider as you navigate your conversations today. We will see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. See you next time.